Hello, everyone. Hi out there. As you can see, Lola decided to get her cameo in early. Hi, Jenny.
Hi. Welcome to the Musical QuaranStream.
I am Glen.
I am Bri, and we're here another week of pitching shows that we think should be musicals.
Yes, and Bristol is checking in the chat as well. Hello, everyone. Nice to see you guys. Thanks for joining in with us today. And so let's see. Do we have anything that we want to recommend to people?
I did. I just watched Anne, which is about the Texas Governor Ann Richards.
Yeah.
Played by Holland Taylor, one-woman show. And that just went up on PBS, and I watched that, and that was cool. And then they have one coming up called Gloria, about Gloria Steinem and the founding of Miss Magazine. So if you're looking for some, I guess, white lady history in the United States, PBS is doing a series where they're showing kind of these shows that, I don't think a lot of people might have gotten to see because of the quarantine or because of the season or whatever. So I liked it. I thought it was great. It's about, gosh, she really goes all in. It's about 2 hours of just her on stage. There really isn't anybody else. One woman show. But that was pretty good. I highly recommend it. I know the National is still doing their thing. They announced 3 or 4 more plays. I haven't really kind of caught up to all that, but yeah, no, I like PBS a lot. It's kind of what I grew up on and helped me decide, I wanted to do opera and theater and stuff. So I like it whenever they showcase, their great performances. And I highly recommend it. Go check it out. It's free.
All right, so that's on the PBS website. You can go and you can watch Anne, a one-woman show about Ann Richards.
Yep.
All right, and Bri was telling me about it earlier today because she watched it without me.
Yes.
But she's like, you really need to see it, you'll enjoy it. And I am determined that this time I'm going to actually see the thing that Bri tells me is good to see before they remove it from the website. So
yes, after you missed Arthur Darvill in Treasure Island, I think that was a wake-up call.
Yes. And it was like, no, I thought I had until Saturday to watch it. Why is it no longer there?
Now.
Yes.
So no, that's kind of a big piece of theater. Not really a whole heck of a lot. Just in case anybody's curious, following my mental health journey. Still doing my therapy, and that's really helpful. And actually, what I think is really funny is the book I'm going to be talking about, I talked about in therapy because I feel like it's really integral to my psyche as Bri. So yeah, we'll talk about that. And actually, Glenn found a copy, and I was like, oh, I should have my phone. I should read it, but I don't have my phone. We had an hour to get ready, and I'm like, oh, I'm not going to have my phone this time. I'm not going to be distracted. And I'm like, well, now I can't read the email.
Yeah, so this is not to get into it too quickly because we want to talk a little bit more before we get into the pitch. But Bri's book that she's pitching this week is a children's book that was a big part of your childhood. I had never heard of it.
Oh, I love it.
And she told me all about it and also told me how difficult it is to find. And I managed to find a digital copy of it, pass it on to her. But I read it first, and as soon as I read it, I was like, oh yeah, this is 100% Bri. And just like anything that is 100% Bri, it's also something that would make a dynamite musical. So
yeah, I think that one of the things that we kind of talked about is, we talked about YouTube channels, we talked about podcasts, and I think when we kind of got back around to well, what do people usually adapt? And books were certainly a major component of that. And I think that sometimes, kids' books get a bit of a bad rap, and I don't think that there's, y'all can correct me if I'm wrong. Please feel free to tweet at me at Reese's Cheese or comment in the video below. But I do feel like kids shows are pretty maligned in the theater community. It's I think when sometimes you're a certain type of performer, you think it's beneath you. I think that everybody feels like it's a good moneymaker for community theaters, but it's of course oh, okay, the obligatory kids show type of thing. I don't think that too often people are like, oh gosh, it's this amazing thing. And a show that we've kind of talked about in the past that kind of is a bit weird in this respect is like the Frog and Toad musical, where they said, oh, it finally blended this great artistic vision with this, kids show format, and it's actually like really well respected. And Glen Baker was in it, who's a really famous actor.
One of my favorite actors, yeah.
And there's a few things like that, and I think that we're seeing more and more of having things that are both family friendly, kid appropriate, like Treasure Island, and like I think Neil Gaiman's Wolves in the Walls, where you can kind of have both, and it's a real whole family experience. So I think that things are changing a little bit, but I still know like I think I would be remiss if I haven't sat on a few board meetings when having a proposal of Pinkalicious or Dear Edwina or something, and they're like, oh, okay, so do the kids show so we can make money, and then do the serious show.
Yeah, and that's always kind of a frustrating thing, and I feel like you said, Frog and Toad was kind of an anomaly on Broadway, which the soundtrack is available, by the way. You can find it with Glen Baker in the cast. It's a great soundtrack. I really enjoy the music from it.
It's really beautiful.
And it's a great show. And it was something that debuted on Broadway as a children's show. Like, they didn't try to hide the fact that it was a children's show. They went straight out there and said, this is a children's show, bring your kids to see it. And it actually ran for a fairly long time on Broadway. And I think that that's interesting because I can remember in the 90s when Beauty and the Beast debuted on Broadway and everything. There was sort of this fear from my teenage friends who were into theater and everything of like, oh, Disney is going to turn everything into children's theater. But Disney really didn't hit that segment of the market. They took their children's material and adapted it to be like wink, wink children's theater.
Yeah, and I think Disney's kind of the big name in that now. And I think it's kind of an easy sell for family entertainment. But it's like, if you think of the past couple of big winners and stuff like that in Broadway, it's Fun Home, it's Hamilton, it's Hadestown. And while you can certainly bring kids to that, there was a big kerfuffle. Theater kerfuffle on Twitter about Lin-Manuel Miranda choosing to censor his material because there are some curse words in Hamilton. I hope that's not spoilers for anybody at this point. It's been out for a while. But he decided to self-censor because if he couldn't get a PG-13 rating, it was a bit harder to then be put on Disney+. And so he cut out some of his F words, and some of the other words get to stay. But
from what I understand, it's only 2 instances of a word, one of which is muted, which personally I don't like that decision. I understand why they do it, but I don't like it. And the other one is replaced with a record scratch.
Yeah, and I think he also kind of brought up, like, if you really want to, like, play the song on the soundtrack, which, I kind of always thought that was weird as a kid, where I could read a book or I could listen to a musical soundtrack, and there were all the words and the themes and everything, and then, the rest of the media that was kind of centered around, upper elementary school, middle school, high school was really like, oh, but nah. So I feel like maybe on some respects I was kind of drawn to theater for that because it's like, ooh, this is like real life. People are cursing. But yeah, he's like, you can play your soundtrack if you play your soundtrack for your kids and it's explicit. You can feel free to do that at home. But, in order to get it on Disney Plus, we had to make some decisions.
Well, and I think once it's been released on Disney Plus, there will probably be a DVD release somewhere down the line. And hopefully we'll get the director's cut will be on DVD, which will be exactly those 2 words. That'll be the only thing different. Who knows?
Right.
But yeah, my thought on like what I was saying about Disney is Disney, you think of Aladdin, you think of The Lion King, you think of Beauty and the Beast. These are all children's stories and children's movies from Disney. But Disney didn't hit the ground saying this is a children's play. Instead, it was like, oh, it's a Broadway show you can bring your kids to. So I feel like there's more room for plays, professional theater plays, that are, no, this is a kid's play. Adults can enjoy it too, but it's a kid's play.
Yeah, one thing that I guess I'd recommend that if you're kind of interested in the development of a Broadway show for kids kind of thing is I like this YouTube channel called Wait in the Wings, and he did one on Musical where it talks about Flaherty and Aarons, who's a really famous composing duo, and they're going to take the works of Dr. Seuss and kind of the problems that I guess producers have when dealing with children's materials, and how do you make it appropriate for kids and make it appropriate for adults, and kind of the different incarnations that Seussical has experienced. And like, I'll be honest, I don't think Seussical was like any of my favorite shows growing up. Like, it was just not kind of on my radar. It wasn't something that I was like looking into, which I think makes a lot of sense, because I think the way that I kind of came at a lot of stuff was like, I know La Boheme. This show is based on La Boheme, and it's called Rent. Okay, so so I feel like I was coming at it at a completely different angle than I think most people come at Broadway shows. I was not really fed like, here's the show for kids. Like, I was always like, I'm gonna do the most adultiest adult thing that I can get away with at like, third grade, and, and then enter in that way. So I think that it's really kind of interesting that the media that we see, what finally kind of makes it to the final draft, is really kind of fed through a lot of filters. It's fed through by the people who are in the room, the people who have the money, and we were actually talking a bit earlier as it relates to comedy, and how easy it is to feel like, oh, I'm doing a great job at comedy. I'm not getting any like flack or negative feedback, and then kind of decades later realizing like, oh, well, because I had everybody else in that room like me, and the people with money paid for what I had to say, and nobody is really self-reflective when things are going great. You're just like, everything's going great, I'm just gonna keep moving forward.
Which I will broach the topic of what we were talking about specifically, because I feel like it deserves discussion, and that is Jon Stewart did an interview just recently here, where he was talking about his regrets he had over the lack of diversity in the writer's room at The Daily Show while he was in charge of it. And that's a topic that we had discussed between us as well, of like, some of the funniest people to work on The Daily Show were people like Samantha Bee and Wyatt Cenac, and people who weren't part of that white male group. And yet it felt like such a white male show with a solidly white male writing team.
Well, and I think adding one more thing to that is, Glenn and I were talking about things that Glenn aspires to do, right? Mm-hmm. And he's like, well, I really like, John Oliver, and Trevor Noah, and Samantha Bee. And I was like, so you like international people talking about American politics?
It was like, oh yeah, all of the best people at doing this right now are the people who were not born in the United States and are now living here and looking at politics.
Yeah, able to be more critical because they're not kind of in the middle of it. And that kind of comes back to what we were kind of talking about is I feel like a lot of comics and creators in the 90s felt like, I'm doing a great job, pat on my back, I'm it wasn't woke back then, but I'm really woke, I'm really in tune with stuff. And, culture changes, and especially if you're kind of moving towards a progressive type of stance on culture, that, it's not enough to just sit here and say, well, somebody should have, rewarded me for being so up to date and so hip and so with it and so willing to, be edgy or, push boundaries or stuff like that. Like, I think that's what they kind of say, when it is product of the time. So to sit there and be graceful about it and be able to say, well, it kind of had some bad ideas, and maybe some of the things I thought we were doing didn't really work out in the way that I'd like to accomplish these goals. That's what happens with science. I think that to be able to have an evolved point of view is probably the better way that we want to have people respond to things instead of, cancel culture or getting angry. It's okay.
As someone who at the time was a huge fan of Jon Stewart, and who feels still very influenced by the work Jon Stewart did, I feel like there's a lot of things that he has yet to consider and really think about from back then that still need addressing, but it was nice to see that he's starting to sort of awaken to the fact of, I could have done a little bit more. And in particular, I want to say two things about it. One thing that he talked about was in 2010, I think it was, someone wrote an article about how white and how male is the staff at The Daily Show. And he said, I was furious about it. I was livid. I brought in the paper and I was reading it in the writer's room, reading it out to them. And I'm like, can you believe they're saying all this stuff about it? Can you believe it, Keith, Mike, David, Joseph? Oh boy. You know? So he acknowledged some of that. And the other thing he acknowledged was, for a long time, their hiring policy was, we get in the submission packages, we cut the names off of them. Nobody sees the name. So there's no unconscious prejudice of, I see the name, I think it's this type of person. Instead, you just read the material, and he was like, we really patted ourselves on the back about how good that was, that we were totally blind testing that and everything. And then he said, and then I looked around our writer's room and realized we were still a solid group of white guys. And I was like, you know, if this was working half as well as I thought it was, I wouldn't be seeing all white male faces looking back at me. And he talked about then having to go to the agencies that sent them these packages and saying specifically, no, we want female voices, we want black comedians, we want Asian comedians. We need these voices in our room. Send us these voices, instead of just being like, send us anybody you think is good. And he was talking about he wished he had done more in his career to open up, he said, the pipeline that was feeding into the writer's room, because he had the power from the Daily Show writer's room to go to the companies that feed talent in and say, you need to be feeding us different talent than you're giving us now.
Well, and I think this all came up because, of course, there's things going on with Tina Fey and pulling episodes of 30 Rock. I recently read an article that related to looking back critically on things like the Book of Mormon, or looking things at Hamilton, and how it's kind of doing a disservice to people who want to get into the industry now, because there aren't people being, trained or recruited or really prepared to do something like Hamilton. There are kind of barriers at every step of the way, and so it's really kind of careful to be reflective of who's in the room and who's making commentary, because, as we were talking about with comedy, I think that there are a lot of, women or POC who can capitulate to white male humor if that means they get a job.
Yeah.
And I think that, if you're, a white male, didn't mean that you didn't struggle to get where you got to go. It doesn't mean that your job wasn't hard, but it definitely meant that, you had a lot of privilege that you had to kind of sit with and consider, just because, like I said, when things are going well, you're going to worry about how many send my kids to college, or put them in braces, or, pay my mortgage. You're not going to be sitting there worrying about, am I creating this equitable environment? But, it's kind of the least you can do to do both.
And it's one of those things with the equitable environment, it's going to take people, in addition to everything else that can be done, it is going to take people who have both power and privilege saying, we need to move people in. It's like Gina Davis wrote about how to get more female representation on screen. And she said one of the first things you do is, anywhere where you have a crowd gathers in your screenplay, change that line to a crowd that is roughly half women gathers. Because if you just say a crowd gathers, they're going to stick a bunch of male faces into the crowd. It's just what the casting is going to default to.
And that's why you don't do colorblind casting. It's you do have to, like they were talking about, you do have to find kind of specific equal representation that you'd like to see.
Yeah.
And I think that way it's you kind of welcome criticism, you welcome diverse ideas as an opportunity to grow, as an opportunity to be more inclusive, an opportunity to work a little bit harder to be a better comedian or writer or creator in general. And I know it's kind of silly, we're both white. We don't, we've not invited anybody here because we're still in lockdown.
Yes.
But, it is something that I think that we think about a lot. And, one of the things that I've kind of been experiencing a lot in kind of my own breakthroughs have been times that I felt excluded and how powerful and difficult that was for me. And I feel like that's really why I feel like I would like to have nobody be excluded. You know, it sucks having rejection and kind of being isolating is not the best way to go through life, and I'm trying to work through all that. But I feel like whenever you hear about injustice or you hear about exclusion for, you know, for nothing, for just being who you are, it's incredibly hurtful. And it's like, it's not just like, you know, hurtful to that person, but it's like, it's hurtful to all of us. And it's hurtful to me because I can very much empathize with that.
Well, and I know I always talk about, like, hey, you know, it sounds really strange to be like, let's dismantle the white cisgender patriarchy when I am a white cisgender heterosexual male. But at the same time, I'm like, you know, if a job that ordinarily would have just gone to me by default winds up going to Wyatt Cenac instead, more power to Wyatt Cenac.
Well, it does really mean, like, the best person gets the best job, and it makes us all improve. Like, I really believe, like, a rising tide lifts all boats.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think that if I were successful and there was still injustice in the world, that I would sit right with that, especially since right now I feel like I maybe don't have the resources or the abilities to create equitable situations because I don't have position of power, I don't have a lot of money, you know, but I feel like the best thing that you can do, that if you feel similarly, is speak out on it, and that's why we wanted to devote a little bit of time to it.
And what I find is I have a little bit, not phenomenal, but a little bit of connection to, like, the stand-up scene. And you will run into stand-ups who complain about how difficult it is for them to get bookings now because they're a white man. And it's like, maybe you need to work on your comedy a little bit then. But
you can get a better type 3.
Yeah, you can tighten up that 15 minutes that you got. You can work on that. But I do think that if I, as someone who's working on trying to get into stand-up comedy, lose a booking to a better comedian who is also more representative of a section of the population I don't represent, that's awesome, because that's making things more interesting. And it doesn't stop me from having a career. It doesn't. The more people are out there entertaining people, the more people want entertainment. So just keep doing your thing and don't worry about somebody else taking their job.
Yeah, I think that's the thing that you kind of keep seeing going around is, like, no, equal rights is not pie. Like, we don't have to worry about sharing a limited supply for everybody. Like, everybody can do their own thing, and if it's rewarded, great, and if it's not, you know, you got to keep working at it. But overall, it's like, you don't have to worry about copying somebody else. You don't have to worry about doing something that somebody else is doing, but you do have to be concerned about, you know, who am I excluding, who am I including, and be really conscientious about those decisions.
Yeah. All right, and...
Like, Nazis bad. Like, if you're making jokes of Nazis, like, that's probably not good.
Yes, I have often said there are all the comedians who are like, I can't get booked on a college campus anymore. And I'm like, maybe you should look at updating your material then. But I'm like, you know, if you can get booked at the Klan rally, you're still going to make a living. It's just maybe you should be thinking about the audience that likes your jokes. Anyway, we've been talking about inclusion and being different, and I don't know, swimming against the tide.
Which brings us to a story about fish.
Yes.
All right. So, my story with Arty the Smarty. I have loved this book ever since I was a little kid. Like 2, 3, 4, like, I mean... Probably this is the first book that I just really fell in love with. Everybody and their mother had to read it to me. Like, I just remember the first time, like, my mom dropped me off at her dad's, and they said, oh, she fell asleep right away, but we had to finish reading it to see how it turned out. And it was, like, really the first book I learned how to read. So, I mean, this is a very, very young reader, but it still has, like, a really special place in my heart. My copy... because I have a younger sister, was ripped in half by my younger sister, which is fine. But I've been always trying to find another copy, and every single time I like see it on Amazon or try to like look it up, it's just like there's nowhere. It's nowhere to be had. It's like hundreds of dollars trying to track it down. But I've always really loved this story, and again, like I said earlier, I brought it up in therapy because we're trying to figure out like, why do you feel the need to be different all the time? What do you think that means to you? And I'm like, well, I liked this book. Because one of the things that I was told was like, it's okay to be a human being. You can join the human race and participate in doing normal things that humans do. And I'm like, no. I had like an immediate reaction, like, I don't want to. And I think Arty the Smarty is probably partially to blame for that. But essentially what it is there's a little fish. His name is Arty. And Arty was a Smarty. And when all the little fish swam this way, Arty swam that way. When all the little fish swam that way, Arty swam that way. And my other favorite thing that my mom would always do is Arty blows bubbles. So in the book, it looks like blue, but my mom would do which is always very entertaining to a 2-year-old. One of my goals as a young person...
It's entertaining to a 40-year-old.
One of my goals as a little kid was also be a Muppet, so, a very good Muppet noise, getting the cheeks involved. And Arty does different things to prove that he's a Smarty and that he's different than all other little fishies, and one of them is he, tricks a fisherman, and there was bacon on a hook and cheese on a hook, which Arty really liked, and so he sneakily takes it off and then puts on an old tire and an old boot, and all the little fish laugh. He wants to be able to make a big splash, and so he goes out into the sea, and everybody says, Arty, don't go out into the sea, there's nets. But he goes out to the sea, and he gets stuck in a whale, and he makes the whale laugh, and he makes a big splash, and so it's all these cute little stories about this little fishy adventure. Mm-hmm. And I just really loved it. I always felt like as a little kid, I was Arty the Smarty. I was smart, and I was different, and I wanted to help other little fish, and, I felt I was kind of brave, and I don't know about all those things anymore. That's something I am working on, trying to be a little bit more owning of my artiness, and what does that mean, and how does it affect my values, and all that other stuff. But that's the story. I mean, it's a cute, short, sweet little story. And in fact, the PDF that Glenn provided to me was how do you read this to a little kid? And how do kids learn how to read this on their own? Because it's supposed to be an easy reader. It's supposed to be that first book that you read. And I just think it would be such a cute little story. To be honest, I don't know how to maybe elevate it in the way things like, The Light Princess or SpongeBob or Wolves in the Walls or stuff like that is. But I also think, it is just fine to tell a story of a little fish who wants to be different. And it's okay to say, if you swim this way, it's fine. You don't have to swim that way. You can still help other people and, play silly pranks. And, I don't know what I enjoy so much about it, aside from it's just somebody who wants to do their own thing, and I think that that's a really human thing. In fact, Hamilton is based on, I want to leave a legacy. I want to be my own person. And I think that little kids feel that way too. I think that's always been my driving force in life. Not only to be doing my own thing and blowing bubbles and being silly and making a big splash. I want to do all those things, of course, but I felt like this book really kind of got me as a little kid. I feel seen by Arty the Smarty. And of course the pictures are really nice and everything. Maybe if we can get a link, and we'll try to put a little link in our description down below so that you guys can kind of see. I think the illustrations are just really sweet and really cute, and I've actually seen some people who've done their nurseries as Arty the Smarty, and I was I'm all about that. It's just adorable. But I think that we don't take kids seriously sometimes, right? So we don't sit there and say oh, you want to make a big splash, or you want to do things different, and we don't give kids kind of a lot of that freedom. And so I've worked in education for a little bit. I've worked in theater education for a little bit. I've tried to always, like, whenever I'm with little kids, to try to listen to them. And sometimes it is really hard because we forget that part about ourselves. But I felt like I never was really listened to as a little kid. Nobody would really talk to me to figure out why I was doing what I was doing or explain why we have to do something. And so I think that Arty kind of gives little kids that very first taste of, like, I can do this. I can change the world. So they don't have to, like, wait until they're 11 with Harry Potter. They can do it at, like, 4. You know?
Well, and I feel like, as someone who has just read the book for the first time recently, I feel like there's a really nice thing about the way that Arty is depicted in the book.
Yeah, like, he's not bratty.
Yeah, he's not bratty.
He's just kind of brave, and he does his own thing.
He wants to do things that are fun and are adventurous and exciting.
And wants to help the other little fish.
Yeah, and that's a big thing, is he wants to help the other little fish, and the other little fish don't get upset with them. And that's even, like we talked about, when all the fish swim this way, Arty swims
There's
this
like
way.
that Arty.
And when all the fish swim this way, Arty swims this way, sort of thing. That, in the story, whenever Arty does that, he, like, confuses all the other fish, and they wind up in a big jumble, and then they have to reset into, like, their school and everything. But there isn't any sort of, like, Arty, why did you do that, or anything like that. It's just, that's what happens when Arty's around.
Yeah. Which is, like, great,
Yeah.
because if you think of how many, like, little kids, like, who might be neuroatypical.
Yeah.
I feel like there's a lot of people who experience the world in a lot of different ways. And
Yeah, so I feel like there are lots of things where that can apply to a child and help them. The idea that being different is not necessarily a thing that will get you thrown out of society. Unlike, I don't know, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer or something like that, where because of the shape of his nose at birth, Rudolph is kicked out of the reindeer games.
And people, fish really care about what happens to Arty.
Yeah.
They always go, don't go near that hook. Don't go out into the big sea with the nets. They want to keep Arty in their community.
But then when Arty succeeds, the other fish celebrate the success.
Yeah. Because it means that then they can do that stuff. Because Arty can teach them how to take bacon off hooks and make big splashes and, not be scared of stuff. And that's the other thing I like about it is they always say, Arty is a little fish. Arty makes little splashes. But Arty wants to make a big splash. But they don't sit there and go like, well, Arty, doesn't know if he can make a big splash. He's like, I'll figure it out.
Yeah.
Like, he doesn't let anything stop him, which I think is also really good.
And I'll say, you were talking about not necessarily knowing how to elevate this. Mm-hmm. I'm in agreement with you that you don't need to elevate this story. You don't need to make this story snarky and cynical. You don't need to make this story big and epic and grand. You just need to tell the story. And I think there's enough in it. When Arty gets trapped in the whale. Yeah. I was like, what a great act, too.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and that's the thing, is, like, there are scary things in this. Mm-hmm. Like, I would definitely say Arty maybe getting stuck on the hook is very scary to, 2 to 4. Arty getting stuck in the whale, very scary. But there's nobody being mean. Yeah. And I always kind of, joke about, I was never that little kid. I never wanted to do pranks because I'm like, pranks are mean. I want to do nice pranks. Mm-hmm. And I feel like that kind of, goes with this Arty the Smarty, is, everybody is very, loving and supportive. This community is there for Arty. And it really just is Arty, he sure is a Smarty. There really isn't anything that's like you said, it's not like Rudolph. It's not people are being mean. It's not like Arty is sad. It's in general a very happy book, but there are big, scary situations that I think that you could heighten the drama in that way. It doesn't have to be like, I hate you, Arty, and then Arty's crying. No, I think you kind of keep it happy.
Yeah, I feel like just telling the story, what you've got, is a story that will sit very well alongside A Year with Frog and Toad, or will sit really well alongside The Wind in the Willows. Yeah. These musicals that are designed for kids to love. Not just for you to be able to take your kids to them. Hi, Lola. not just for you to be able to take your kids to them, but for your kids to genuinely love this show and fall in love with musical theater.
And I think if you think about other undersea things that have gone on stage, like Little Mermaid, like SpongeBob, there is such like room for sequins and vibrant. So I mean, like I think that creating an undersea world would be a lot of fun. I also feel like, you know, if I was the, you know, recent graduate from a drama program going on tour with this, you could have a lot of fun with it, especially because in general it's like going back and being a little kid and playing on the playground. You know?
What do you hear for the style of music? Like, what musical artist, composer do you think would be good for this?
Well, one of my, I'm really, really interested, and I've been trying to give this a lot of thought. Like, I'd really love to go back and study music for my higher education terminal degree. It's not something that I did when I was a lot younger, because one, music programs are very intensive and they're also really critical. And as I was talking about, like, it's sometimes really hard to be critiqued all the time, especially when you don't have a lot of confidence in yourself. But I've had a lot of, like, real interest on kind of our bi-coastal rhythmic things. Like, there's a lot of really interesting Pacific Rim type of rhythmic sounds, and then there's a lot of really interesting Caribbean, Puerto Rican, Cuban type of sounds. So I'd love kind of like a nice mishmash of all that, and I think that you can maybe do like an act 1 or an act 2, or maybe like, you know, this is the fisherman versus this is the whale or something like that. And I'd love to have that kind of experience, because I think that there's a lot of fun music out there. When I was a little kid, I grew up in Texas, where I loved the Gypsy Kings. So I think having kind of like a more global sound would be really important. Like, you know, have the calypso, have the merengue, have the marimba, like that type of stuff. I think that'd be really fun. And I think that that's stuff that's like, you can have little kids appreciate it. Because I was like, I think one of the prime examples of it is they kept Deo and Beetlejuice. You know? And here it's like, you know, it would be a nice, like, party fish.
Well, yeah, I think that that's a really good idea for the music. See, and I fully acknowledge this is white male, but like my first thought when I was thinking of how would this go on stage and everything is I was like, oh man, if he was still alive, this would be a great show for Harry Nilsson to do the music for.
All true.
And then I think, strangely enough, I moved from Harry Nilsson to, well, Jack Johnson would be interested for this.
Yeah.
You know, something...
Yeah, the Hawaiian Moana.
Yeah, that Hawaiian, relaxed, sort of laid back, everything's cool, sort of... I could see that for the music.
And that could be like Arty's theme, right? You know, if you have like... You can imagine Jack Johnson, Banana Pancakes. That's like Arty.
Yeah.
That's his theme.
Yeah, and then I'm like, oh, I can't think of the guy's name, but the guy who did write a lot of the... sort of Pacific Rim segments of Moana. Yeah. I would love to see him in collaboration with like Jack Johnson to create these sounds.
Yeah, I think like having some Don Ho type of stuff there, because it's like some of my favorite places to kind of relax and to be calm and to be with my family has either been like, I love the Gulf of Mexico. Like, you know, I spent a lot of my childhood going to Sanibel, which is like kind of where my parents live now. And then, when I was in high school and I was in college, like, we got to go over to Hawaii because my dad was building a wastewater treatment plant. And I think that, you know, that's where I have always felt really safe, really calm, really inspired. I really am inspired creatively by water a lot. So this is kind of like my dream. Even though, like I said, I don't think that I would ever sit down and be like, I'm going to write a kid's show. But I feel like I love the characters. I love the story. I feel like you could get a lot of people really enjoying it. And I feel like it would just be, like, really super fun to get that type of collaboration. Because, like, one of the things that I think really worked with SpongeBob was he kind of started with the ukulele and ended with the ukulele, right? Not that you can't have that, but I feel like, you know, you want to kind of have this, like, party atmosphere. I think of like Raffi growing up, you know, not that you want like a baby beluga in there, but like you want to be able to have a lot more fun and joy and having that feeling of being safe and secure. I think it's really funny that a lot of people are like, they're not really at ease, kind of being around water, and I understand it. But I was such the opposite way as a little kid. I was like a water baby. If there was time to be in the pool, I'd be in the pool. I dreamed of living in the ocean. I just really, really enjoyed everything about the beach, everything about being in the water. And I think that it's just because I had a lot of positive associations with it.
Yeah.
I think it's really exciting to be in deep water with a bunch of fish.
And I was feeling so bad about it. I can't remember this guy's name. So I looked up his name, and I apologize in advance that I am probably going to mispronounce it. But Opataya Fawai was one of the composers on Moana who handled a lot of the more traditional sounds in the soundtrack.
Yeah, directed. I think there was a choir. We watched a little bit of behind the scenes. But I think that there's a lot of opportunity for that type of stuff, and I think it would be really fun to do it at a show like this because I think, quite literally, kids are little sponges, and I think the more you kind of expose them to, these polyrhythms and these types of music, there's an advantage to them not being super critical. Because if you get somebody by the time that they're a teenager and they've experienced all the same things, well, it's not like everything else I heard, so I don't like it. But I feel like you can be a little bit more experimental and maybe a little bit more, adventurous. Because it's an adventurous little fish. There's some scary situations. And there really isn't a precedent for it. And so if you start somebody's musical journey with something that's creative and fun and different and all this really exciting new music, both for little kids and for adults, I think that'd be really fun.
Yeah. And I just want to throw in that conversation of starting musical journeys, I feel like that's the thing we both noticed working in community theater and seeing teenagers 13, 14, around that age, who were discovering hip-hop through Hamilton. And they talk back and forth about and then they do this thing with their voice, and it's really weird. And it's well, let me tell you a story about a man named Bismarck, and by the way he composed Hamilton, Lin-Manuel Miranda not just did a great show, but also did kind of a crash course on the different formats of hip hop.
Well, not only that, but also musical theater, because he has Modern Major General and Sound of Music. He has a whole bunch of other stuff in there as well.
So I feel like there's a lot of value to that of taking a show like this and being and this lets us introduce some new ideas to kids.
And I was and how fun would it be to have a little chorus of fishies, and in the choral there's steel drum, or something. I don't know. I think that would be fun. I know that we've known a couple of steel pan ensembles, but I feel it really kind of gives you that opportunity for those folks who are really talented at maybe some unique instruments to be able to kind of play and have fun with it.
Yeah. All right. I am ready to work on this show.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't know if this is going to be the first thing I'm going to do when we're done with the QuaranStream. But I think it's definitely up there. I think it's definitely something that if I were to get into a music PhD program, I would probably be pushing a lot of my research in this direction. Because then I can get children's theater and musical theater and all of my Afro-Caribbean beats.
Yes.
And I think that it would be a really fun project to work on for you kind of have to work for 8 to 10 years.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would get a lot of joy out of that. I was I haven't written a musical since college because life, but this would be a fun next one.
Yeah. All right. Well, I feel like that's a fairly solid concept for the show here. We've settled this, it's going to be a kids show.
Kids show.
Kids show.
So,
not a Broadway show you take the kids to, a kids show.
And I hope that it will end with how my grandparents said well, we just had to finish and see how it turned out.
Yeah.
They fell asleep after Act 1, but we stayed because it was so engaging. That would be the biggest joy from a show like this is that yes, it was written for children. It's supposed to be enjoyed by children, but everybody else kind of gets enjoyment from it because they can kind of see themselves in it. I think it's a very universal theme, and I would really like that, if your kid falls asleep in Act 1, you guys stick around for Act 2 because it's that engaging.
And I've just got to say, I would so buy a ticket tomorrow to see Daveed Diggs as Arty the Smarty.
Oh, yes. Yeah, I don't know. It's like I can really, really dig it. I feel like on the one hand, it's a book that kind of ruined me. Because then Arty the Smarty is a lot to aspire and live up to. But it's also just a book that I think, is so calming and so reassuring because it is that you can take on the world and it's going to be okay.
Yeah.
I like it.
Yeah.
I like it a lot. I'm sorry that you won't be able to find a copy of it anywhere. If we can find a link to put it on our new bookshop site, we will do that. But
I'm going to say bookshop, we're probably not going to be able to find it.
It's really hard to find.
Which,
they
by
need
the
to
way,
reprint. I don't know who to ask.
yes,
I don't have $1 million, but somebody out there has to, and they have to, convince somebody that they need a reprint of this.
Yeah. And Faith McNulty, apparently a lot of Faith McNulty's work is out of print right now. But there's 3 or 4 books that are still in print from Faith McNulty, so maybe it's about due for a renaissance. Like I said, we're not going to be able to put it on the bookshop, which there's the URL going by now. But we can, if you're willing to sit in a waiting list to borrow it, I can, under the YouTube post of this video, put a link to the archive. The Internet Archive has a copy of it in their library. So,
Yep, highly recommend.
Yes.
I mean, it's a quick read. I think that when you get to all the blowing bubbles parts or fish laughing parts, I think those are the most musical, and I think you can kind of get into it from there.
Yeah, I know I have a few friends who do voice acting who watch our show every now and then on YouTube. If you're a voice actor or you're interested in voice acting, I feel like this is a great book for working on your voice acting, for working on the sounds and working on different voices and expressiveness and things like that.
Yes.
Or
the other thing I always say is I always read this book when I was a Girl Scout because there was the Texas School for the Blind, where it's sometimes not all blind people know how to read Braille, so they would say, "Could you record books on tape?" And I always did this book.
Hey.
So if that's something you want to do, being kind of Good Samaritan out there, kind of being kind and passing that around, there's definitely repositories like that. I don't know if it's everywhere, but I bet that there would be somebody who would be willing to have that, or maybe if there's an inner city charter school or something. I highly, highly encourage it. I wish every little kid and every family could read this book.
Yes. It is definitely a good book. I'm going to say that. It's a good book for kids. I think there's a lot of adults who would benefit from reading this book. So
yeah,
it's a short read. Little bit of text on each page, mostly illustrations. 64 pages, including all of the pages on how to read this book to your kid.
Yes. Yeah, it's pretty good.
Yeah.
And just because you get swallowed by a whale doesn't mean it's the end.
Yes.
You can come out and make a big splash.
Yes.
I think that's what we need for the quarantine right now. Just because we're all in the belly of the whale doesn't mean we won't come out on the other side, but we all need to work together.
Oh, man.
Make that big splash.
Wash your hands, wear your masks, social distancing.
Yes.
I know it's difficult, but keep on keeping on.
We were noodling around with the ukulele earlier and singing all of our songs of quarantine, which we hope to make kind of a special release for you guys.
Yes.
As we get to go outside for the very first time on Friday.
Yes.
Officially. We did go out to vote. I was able to vote from the safety of a car. I passed out a little note that explained why I couldn't get out of the car. I brought disinfectant wipes. I tried to keep everything as clean as possible, but luckily my voting precinct was really great about it. They brought things in and out. They even brought me a little sticker. I kind of waited a little bit too long for absentee voting, but I was really happy that they were able to accommodate me. You had a little bit of a different experience.
Yes, I had a very different experience. Because here's the thing, Bri is always on top of everything whenever we're like moving around, and I'm usually trailing a couple of months behind. So we moved. I forgot to update my voter registration.
I did it like week 1. I was like, oh, because we had so many problems with the 2016 election.
Now I want to be very clear here. I did not do anything illegal.
Right. Correct.
Because we moved recently enough that I'm still within a window of they would let me vote in my old precinct.
Yes, and we're still in the same county no matter which precinct we're doing. This was also a primary to decide which candidates were going to be running for Congress, R versus D. So it kind of was one of these lucky situations where we could have voted anywhere in the state or of our district.
Yeah.
Which both of these sites were in our district, and it would have been fine.
But after the great experience we had with Bri's district, where they had a COVID nurse standing by, where they had people standing out by the curb to catch people who needed to do curbside voting and things like that, we went to my polling place. There was nobody outside the building. So I had to step inside, like I said, maintaining mask, maintaining social distancing, having a disinfectant wipe that everything I touched, I disinfected instantly, trying to do my absolute best to keep everyone safe, and saying, hey, can I get someone to come out and do curbside voting for me? They had to hunt down the guy who was doing the curbside voting. He says, do you have the photo ID for the person who is curbside voting? And I said, the person who is curbside voting is me. I'm in quarantine. And he said, oh, just check in over there. And he sat down.
That's not great.
And so I turned to all of the people who were volunteering there, which I was the only person in there to vote at that time. I turned to all the people who were voting there, and I was like, well, I have my disinfectant wipe. I guess I'll just go ahead and vote. And they all maintained distance and everything. I was cordially invited to take with me the pen that I used to mark my ballot. So, hopefully everybody is safe at that district.
Yeah, I've talked with a few people who absentee voted, and they said it was a real positive experience. Even some of them had anxieties about it, but, I've done election officialing in the past, and I told them they didn't really have to worry about it. They do have it. It's very safe. It's very under control. Their vote will be counted. And with kind of how the virus is going, I really do think that, I might be requesting an absentee ballot for November.
Yeah.
We just don't know. There's not really a vaccine. The curves aren't really going down. So it may be a real possibility that we will be absentee voting, several months from now, unfortunately.
Yeah, and that is
I had one scare. I'm not having any more.
No.
I actually quit my job that I had the scare at. I just figured I earned $100 and I got exposed to COVID, and I was just like, it's not worth it. I was like, I want to live, and I want money. I love money. If you want to donate to our Ko-Fi, I'm not going to say no. But it just came to was being exposed to COVID, being in severe isolation and lockdown, because there was several days we had to be in different rooms. I couldn't leave a room and
I think
get them infected.
I think the first 3 or 4 days after you were informed you were exposed, the doctors were advising that we spend all of our time in separate rooms.
Yeah, and so I kind of figured
Thank you, Jenny.
Yeah, yes, and yours too. You need to take care of yourself too, Jenny. So after all that, I was just like, that for $100 for a week's worth of work, and for potentially, if I was infected, it was a $75 doctor visit. It was basically the money I made was already gone by having to take care of the problem, and I just figured, better to be safe than sorry at this point.
Mm-hmm.
If this happened once, it can happen again, and you don't go back out to kind of be hit by another bullet, because I kept debating, well, gosh, I came through this just fine. I tested negative, but it's you know, it's that shouldn't be the attitude that you have to take. And luckily, you know, I'm fortunate enough that my parents are able to help me out a lot. So kind of talking with them, it just made a lot of sense to not go back and try to dodge another bullet, because maybe next time I wouldn't be so lucky.
And I don't want to get into a huge political rant, but everything is political, so I'm going to get into a huge political rant. We had the case during the quarantine of the wine and liquor chain, which was owned by a Democrat. I think you should call out people on your own side when they're wrong. That he started out seemingly nicely enough by being like, we're going to give our employees hazard pay because we're still open, we're still considered an essential business. We're going to give our employees hazard pay. We're going to pay them $2 an hour extra. His employees worked hard, they pushed hard, they got curbside delivery down, online ordering down. Like, within a week, they were running at full speed, and by 3-4 weeks into the quarantine, they were actually breaking sales records for that time of year with everything that they had to do in order to sell around the quarantine. And then just suddenly, like that, he canceled the hazard pay and was like, yep, that's over. And I looked at that and I said, okay, let's say none of them worked any overtime during this time. Which, well, I bet a few hours of overtime got put in. But I was like, if none of them worked any overtime, if they just worked a 40-hour week, they did all of that for $80 a week extra. And I was like, they propped up the business, they made certain it was still running, they brought in more money than they ever brought in, each of them for only $80 a week extra.
Well, and I think there's a lot of other issues as well. You know, I got furloughed after I had already spent my $1,200 on moving. So, you know, it's one of these things that I think if there was more support financially to common people versus larger businesses, I think it probably would have done a lot better, because I do know, like, when I had, you know, my $1,200, I used it to pay 2 men's salary who helped move us. I could buy disinfectant wipes from a local business who made disinfectant wipes because we couldn't find any anywhere. So I feel like, you know, I was really kind of spreading my economic wealth around a bit better. Yeah. And I would not have probably looked for a second job.
And Jenny says that their state has the most lax quarantine restrictions of any state. And yes, that is scary. And we're seeing things with the federal government saying it's going to stop funding for testing sites and things like that.
Well, and like, let's just be honest, okay? Like, people should not be out anyway. We were driving to our polling place, and literally there was this jerk that was in this big Escalade, driving 50 miles an hour in a 35 mile an hour zone, flipping off a poor 16-year-old student driver, flipping off us. So I'm just like, we can all stand to be inside just a little bit longer, guys. Come on. Like, this is the first taste of freedom we got, and you behave this way. You're an adult in a big old car. You knew better.
Yeah, he was like 3 cars behind us. We were in the left lane. He swerved over into the right lane to pass everybody on the right, and then got up just about even with us. And that's where there was a kid in a student driver car driving along.
I mean,
working really hard.
And this was 7 in the morning. So it's like she was doing the responsible thing, being like, I'm going to do it when nobody is out. You know, she's trying her best.
And I'm like, dude, you are in a car that costs more than most people's houses. I don't think we are so much of an inconvenience to you that you need to scream and flip everybody off.
Well, and I'm sure y'all have seen it as well. The second he did get around us and her, what was there? There's a stoplight.
Yes.
Because it's a 35 mile an hour back road.
Yes.
So anyway, the best you can do is we hope that we brought some light and some humor to your life. We hope that, you know, you're dealing with everything really, really well. I feel like I still struggle with being as productive as I would like. Very, very high anxiety about coming back to my job and doing the right amount of work and getting things done on time. I don't know if I'm being successful at that, but I at least look forward to this every week. I look forward to completing this, and if I can complete one thing, I can complete 2 things. If I can complete 2 things, I can complete 3 things. And, little by little, hopefully I will get to where I want to be, and, getting back to, pre-quarantine and feeling good about the work that we do. But I always feel confident about this. I'm always really happy to do this work and to bring it to you guys and hope that we're bringing smiles to your face.
Yes. And now, coming up on Saturday, it's going to be my turn to pitch again. And since Bri started out with a children's book, I figured that I would start out our 4 shows about books with a children's book as well. Although I guess technically I'm doing more of a children's franchise.
It's fine.
It's something that is actually very important to my childhood, and I'll discuss that more on Saturday. But genuinely, yes, I was the little boy who grew up reading Nancy Drew novels.
Who doesn't love good mystery?
So
Mysteries aren't gendered.
Saturday, come back and join us. I am going to be talking about my ideas for Nancy Drew the musical. All right, and so until next time, you guys, we love you. Thanks so much for joining us. We hope you keep joining us. Meeting you here. Let's see. Much love to both of you, guys. We love meeting you here for this show, and anytime you can be here, we love to see you pop in. All right, so good night. Wear your mask, wash your hands, social distancing, and, take care of yourself, because we're not there to take care of you, okay? All right, let's fade out of here. Let's fade out. Fade.